Welcome to ScrewedChannel.com. Today's lesson, Season 1, Episode 2, Framing. How you frame your subjects to make it more visually interesting. So the first step is always trying to find a balance in your frame where you give the visual symmetry that helps provide a little depth in the image. That's always a step. Little departure from snapshot photography of yesteryear. Digital photography tips. The first one is composing your shot. There's a rule of thirds where your frame is cut up in 3 sections of 3s, considered 9 squares. It's always good to frame in a way where you give people a little visual symmetry, make the frame more interesting. The next thing, learn your exposure. Learn about the manual settings you have on your camera, how you can adjust how the iris allows less light in and more light, how the shutter speed allows faster or slower images to be captured, and learn how to choose when you want to have a slow exposure. If you have little light, if you have a lot of light, you can have a faster exposure if you're capturing sports, kids, or animals. You want to give people visual perspective. So here we see that I'm in the foreground and the wall is in the background. So you want to create a sense of depth. Always a good tip. A simple background is a good way to isolate your subject and tell the story that way. Learning about your ISO speed and your camera sensitivity is a good way to maneuver in tricky lighting situations where you don't have a lot of light. Now, at the expense of getting a little grainy, you can increase your ISO setting, which is your camera's sensitivity to light, and you could shoot in near darkness, but you risk getting a grainy and sometimes soft image. Shutter speeds are fun to play with. If you can bracket your exposure, which means you take a picture with plus or minus 1 or 2 on the aperture or the shutter speed that is typically set by the automatic light meter inside your camera. If you bracket and set your camera to manual, you can experiment with different shutter speeds and get different effects. Learning digital photography is simple, especially with an iPhone app that helps you simulate what a really good camera can do. So here's an app called Manually, and it allows access to all these options that you can choose and help your picture get exposed better. So we'll start with the shutter speed. So the shutter, we can adjust. As you see, the higher shutter, the more light you need to expose it, and here we're not getting a lot of light. And so if you go to say a 1/15 of a second, you get a little shaky, so you got to hold it really still, but you can get more light out of a darker situation. And a 1/60th is a typical exposure. So here it's almost twilight, so it's pretty much a little too dark to hand hold anything above a 1/60th. And these higher shutter speeds are for action or sports. And as you can see, you need more light to do it. So let's say we want to do it at 2/50th of a second. So then we'll go to our exposure and we could bring that up a little and maybe buy some more light that way. That didn't work, so let's try our ISO, making it more sensitive. So right here we can, this particular app only lets us go to 500 ISO. So right now you can get a little bit more exposure at the expense of grain. So we'll bring down the shutter speed down to a 1/60th, and that should help. And these also have the option of giving you a little grid to help you with your framing as we discuss the 2/3 rule. And you've also got auto white balance, because a camera needs to white balance to the type of light you are photographing in. So for instance, daylight is 5600 Kelvin, indoor incandescent light 3200 Kelvin. So there's a scale in the color temperature range that you need to learn how to set your camera. Here it's on auto. Let's put this on daylight. And if we were to go to, say, tungsten, these are different color temperatures that you can set your camera to. So you can get time-lapse done. There's also slow-mo. The iPhone offers a great slow-mo, something that used to cost $10,000 to capture an image going really fast and capture it in slow-mo of, say, up to 10,000 frames per second. This little phone can give you about 240 frames per second built in. So it's a really nice feature. Here's an example of a slow-mo shot I took of a fountain at Chelsea Market. Normally I remind people to photograph in the 16:9 mode, but in this case it was a vertical waterfall, so I broke my own rule. So here's a great little slow-mo shot. What's nice is it even slows down the audio. So using slow-mo and finding all the right times to affect the slow-mo shot is just another arsenal in your digital photography toolkit. Here's a little time-lapse video I took on this. So there's all kinds of little digital tricks you can use your smartphone for in fun with digital photography.